when I talk about Sitefinity and when I talk about almost any system that we're creating as developers, there are really two things that we're concerned with most of the time. We're concerned with data and how we're displaying that data. So what we're going to be talking to with Sitefinity today is mostly going to be concerned with how data works within Sitefinity and how we have control over the display of data in Sitefinity. Presentation of data is hugely important, of course. So we're going to be talking about data within Sitefinity, how we can manipulate the data model, the tools we use for that, connections and connectors, so all of our out-of-the-box connectors, pushing and pulling. One of the lesser-known features of Sitefinity is our ability to push and pull content out of Sitefinity using our alternative publishing and pipes in order to connect up to things like Twitter feeds and have our news articles automatically be published. That's an out-of-the-box thing, but that whole system is open enough that we can connect it up to other social media systems and other systems where we want to pull in content, maybe from an RSS feed, and pull it directly into Sitefinity so we can manage it within Sitefinity. We're also going to be talking about external systems. So there are all sorts of systems that your customers have that are going to be very specific to them. These are going to be custom databases. These are going to be lesser used solutions that we need to pull data out of into Sitefinity, or we need to push data from Sitefinity into these systems. And we've built out APIs so that we can always get at our data, and we can also do things like have events-based triggers so that any of our data create, read, deletes can be used to push out data to other systems. Things like filling out forms within the systems can trigger things in code so we can push out information that's been filled in a form, e-commerce events, things like that. Another big thing, and something that we've added a lot of support for recently, is search. So we've made our search system a lot more flexible than it used to be, and we've added a number of different providers so we can use things beyond Lucene. We can use things like Elasticsearch, we can use Azure Search, we can use Amazon Search. And we've done it in such a way that if you have a search provider that you would like to integrate with Sitefinity, there's just an interface we have to implement, and we can use it, and it'll be integrated with the whole system. Display of data, we're basically going to be going through some stuff that you as developers, if you've worked with Sitefinity, you probably are doing a lot of. So styling, how themes work within Sitefinity, how our templates work, how we can upload those into the system using our tools for Visual Studio. Also talking briefly about some of the new things with MVC, but that we'll be getting into a little bit later in our MVC session. We're also going to be going through how we can build out custom widgets, and also how we can provide options to end users in those custom widgets. We do have full control over our designers within Sitefinity, so we can make these widgets in such a way that they are really reusable and really end user friendly. So data within Sitefinity. A lot of the things I like to highlight about the data within Sitefinity is that the data model is very flexible. We have a lot of support for hierarchical data models, being able to associate data within the system with other pieces of data within the system, being able to control how that data is inputted by making sure that things are verified in a certain way, matching regular expressions, how we're going to be inputting data there. The permissions on all of our data are very granular. We can set content item permissions in terms of who can view, who can edit, who can really manage all of our data. And this is important because our API respects that. So when we're calling out as a user to see what maybe news articles they can view, it's going to respect that, and I'm not going to have to necessarily muck around in order to filter that based on permissions already. It is important that it is programmatically accessible. We can get at our data in a number of different ways. We have our .NET API, of course, and our .NET API is divided into two sections. We have a native API and we have a fluent API. So it's going to respect whichever way in which you are more comfortable accessing our data. The other thing is that all of our data is accessible via RESTful web services. So anything that we want to do in order to call out from other systems and grab data and pull it in, we can do that as well. User-friendly and customizable user input. So when we build out new data types and all the data types within the system, when we enter them in, when we create them, we automatically create a backend for you. But the thing is, it's all customizable. Ultimately, all of our form controls, places where we're entering in text, choosing images, all of that, these are ultimately just controls in a standard ASP.NET system. And we can get into the back end of the system, and we can change them, we can tweak them, we can add custom validation. So we can make sure that we're providing a user interface to our users that's going to be customizable and user-friendly. The last thing is going to be storage provider flexibility. So we have a lot of flexibility on the back end to use different storage providers in order to store data. So out of the box, for a lot of our content, we're supporting things like SQL Server, SQL Azure, Oracle, MySQL, but we also have a lot, even more flexibility when we're talking about things like documents, images, and videos, things that are going to really put a stress on your bandwidth. We can put those into CDNs. We can put those on Amazon S3. Heck, we can even store them within Dropbox. So moving on with that, again, talking about our storage providers. So these are the basic ones that we have out of the box. When you install a very vanilla Sitefinity, all of these options will be available to you. So SQL Server from 2008 on, SQL Express, we tend to use that a lot when we're installing onto developer machines so that we can develop against something that's local. Oracle, MySQL, and File System. File System is mostly for file storage, but that is one of those areas where we can extend to use things like a CDN. Data provider model, we can also extend this as well via code. So we actually have documentation on how on the sorts of methods that you need to provide to our data providers in order to hook up external databases if we want to store information within them, yet still have it managed by Sitefinity. And the dedicated storage providers for blob data are things that I'm talking about with respect to video, files, images, those sorts of things. So, again, we don't care where the data is stored because we've abstracted away into the data provider model. We can store it in pretty much any system. The out-of-the-box ones are listed first, but then we have the other ones that could be integrated if we wanted to. We find that not too many people do this, but it's nice to have the flexibility. So again, storage and data providers, very easy to actually hook things up to things like Windows Azure, Amazon S3, Dropbox, even our Tele for backend services, which is our storage provider CDN that we use for our mobile application development platform called the Teller platform we can connect up to. We have CDN support for Amazon, Azure, CloudFront. Basically, it can be built out, it has been built out, and it's something that we see our customers doing very often, especially when we're trying to scale. Moving on to some of the connectors that we have out of the box for Sitefinity. There's of course the Digital Experience Cloud. I'll be getting into that a little bit later just to show you how easy it is to set up and how that process works, what we're tracking out of the box. We connect to SharePoint. We're finding this is a really good solution for a lot of people who are just moving into a more advanced web presence because they might have SharePoint on their back end where they're doing a lot of their document management, but they need to be able to get those files up into something like a CMS in order to serve them out to their end customers, either through a public-facing website or through a portal. And that's another very easy thing to set up. We support 2010, 2013, and online. We have our Salesforce connector. Our Salesforce connector allows us to sync up forms with Salesforce. So if we have a contact us form, that can connect directly to Salesforce and then sync up responses to that form into the leads or contacts areas of Salesforce. We can also pull user information out of Salesforce into Sitefinity for profile purposes in order to place people into specific roles and things of that nature. Microsoft Dynamics, this is not something that we did ourselves. This is something that one of our partners has built out and is actually one of the most robust connectors that we have, and somewhere that we find that our partners are really able to add a lot of value to our clients. And in many ways, in this the Microsoft Dynamics connector, they've really been able to productize it. They've really been able to say this is a set price, it's out of the box, we install it, we're done. So you aren't spending a whole lot of time doing that, but it does generate a lot of revenue. And that allows us to have really robust connections with Microsoft Dynamics in order to pull data out of there, surface it within Sitefinity, push data from Sitefinity forms into Microsoft Dynamics, all of that. The last one is Marketo. Marketo is really just the ability to, again, push form data into Marketo. So as we build out a Marketo profile, being able to sync up the fields there. We support all of the Marketo fields, even custom ones. And we can actually also use Marketo as a basis for a user segment within our personalization. So if we wanted to say people who have a certain Marketo field associated with them, we can personalize the page based upon that. Or we can personalize based upon their Marketo lead score. So talking a little bit more about the Digital Experience Cloud Connector. Some of the things that we're actually tracking out of the box with the Digital Experience Cloud Connector, all you have to put in is an API key, and we'll start tracking it for you, are things like page visits, both regular and personalized pages, form submissions, file downloads, any comments people are making on blogs or things that have comments enabled for them, forum posts, users, logins, logouts, registrations, any changes to the profile fields, we're tracking the metadata, social tracking, so if you do have any shares on your site in terms of share on Facebook, tweet this, what's great about it, and something where our partners can really add a lot of value, is that we do provide the SDK so that you can instrument both external sites and external systems to push data into the digital experience cloud. The fact that it's easy to do this with both JavaScript and .NET at this point in time means that we can push a whole variety of things about our interactions and the customer experience into the digital experience cloud very easily. Another part of this is that we are starting to surface some of the insights that we're getting from the DEC directly within the CMS, so people can see things about their personas, things about the most improved conversions without actually needing the context of the CMS or the DEC. Moving on to the connector for SharePoint. It's a two-way sync, and we can set it up so it is a two-way sync, or we can set it up so it's just one way or the other, so we can have sort of master-slave setups. So multiple SharePoint sites can be set up to sync to our individual Sitefinity site, so we can be pulling in from many different, maybe departmental sites or something like that, if they have a SharePoint deployment like that. The synchronization capabilities cover a lot of different things. We can sync to Sitefinity dynamic modules, any lists that are within our SharePoint system. We can sync over libraries, so document libraries and images, and those will go directly into our document libraries and images as they're set up. We can also sync over calendars and events, which tends to be something that's very attractive to customers, being able to surface any events that they're having that they want to expose externally very easily and still manage it within SharePoint. So with our fields mapping, most of the SharePoint fields are supported. We do have in our documentation exactly which ones are supported. We can set up, if we know things about the system, the exact mapping that we're going to want for all of our fields. If we already have a content type within Sitefinity set up, we can do that. And this all, of course, yes.
Does that apply to SharePoint 2013 on-prem as well as online?
Yes. So we actually do support SharePoint Online. It's something that we included with Sitefinity 7.3.
Great. Thank you.
Sort of keying off of that, talking a little bit about SharePoint Online. Again, support for cloud and on-premise. It's got an entire feature parity with our SharePoint 2010, 2013 connector. So it's going to work exactly the same way. Effectively, it allows us to integrate with Office 365 Enterprise and OneDrive. And the reason that this is so important is as people are moving their SharePoints online, Microsoft is moving away from being able to manage sites and manage pages with SharePoint. So the SharePoint websites have recently been discontinued by Microsoft. And we see ourselves as being the de facto extension of SharePoint Online so that we can offer customers user experiences through web pages and being able to build out those sites easily in a way which is going to sync up with all of their resources. So the connector for Salesforce, again, something I've talked about a little bit. It's the same thing as with SharePoint in that it is a two-way connector, so we can sync data back and forth, both from our forms to SharePoint and from our SharePoint into our users. It's very easy to set up. It can be scheduled to happen on a regular basis, and most of the SharePoint fields are supported for these mappings. And I will be getting into that a little bit during our demonstration. So Microsoft Dynamics really is a great example of us getting in with our partners and being able to push solutions to the market. Basically, they built out something where you can access and edit any CRM entity within Microsoft Dynamics. You can show charts from Microsoft Dynamics. You can sync contacts, leads with Sitefinity users and roles. You can sync CMS forms with the CRM, and it's provided by our technology partner Pebbles through the portal connector. And this is really fantastic. They've added custom form fields. They've added extensions to forms where they're doing a lot of stuff with being able to set up very different kinds of multi-page forms. And all of this has to do with Sitefinity extension points that are already there that allow us to extend Sitefinity and build out these very rich connectors for other systems. Our connector for Marketo. So we do have the ability to sync our CMS forms with Marketo. And it's able to be done away so that we can sync it with any form that's within Marketo. We just have to match up the name on the form field, and we can push it to any custom form fields that we have within Marketo. So we also have some ability to change lead scores within Marketo when people fill out forms and things of that nature. And also, all of our personalization with Marketo also works with anonymous visitors connectors, and I wanted to talk a little bit about pushing and pulling data from the system. So there are three things that are really important here from my standpoint, and those three are the publishing system, event-driven scenarios, and web services. So these are the main ways in which we're getting data in and out of a Sitefinity system. So with our publication system content pipes, we're able to connect up to XML content from any system or file using some custom development in order to pipe content into our publishing system. A lot of our systems within Sitefinity use this idea of a pipe in order to grab content. It's actually part of how our search providers are set up. We're using a pipe in order to pipe content into our search indexes. In this case, we're just using a pipe to pipe content into the actual system, our publishing system. We already have a number of things built out so that we can automatically push to social media like Twitter or to an RSS feed or pull from sources like that. The event system. This is something that a lot of people are using for creating those real-time integrations with things like SAP for ERP systems. So we can do things like pushing out real-time tracking of inventory and things of that nature. So there are a lot of things within the event systems. I can't cover them all, but some of the big ones that people are using a lot is that all data has a create, update, and delete event that we can hook into. Any data within the system, including dynamic data, we can figure out when something has happened to it and then push that interaction out into another system. You could just are able to hook into those directly in your global.asax and trigger any code that we need to run. Very easy to do. We have form events, so when a form is validated, when it's submitted, it triggers a different event that we can hook into. User events, so if somebody's logging in, somebody is registering, we can use those events to trigger various things on information, including they're changing their profile. We have e-commerce events, so when things are added to carts or during the checkout process, various things about when the order is placed, when the order is submitted, we can key into those in order to hook up with ERP systems and push data that way as well. We have media content download events, so if you want to be tracking the sort of things that people are downloading within the system, we can get into that as well. The other aspect of this is web services. So all data within Sitefinity, all of our content data is accessible via web services, and these follow a lot of conventions so that we can make sure they're going to be as efficient as possible. We're able to push in data from other systems using these web service endpoints, so all of your CUD operations are available through these. We can update data, we can change taxonomies, we can even make changes to pages through these if we would like to. Another one is changes to content lifecycle. If we want to push something through our workflow in being in awaiting approval status and going to published, we can do that as well. And we do, of course, have the ability to implement your own services. So if you see something available in the API, since it is just an ASP.NET web application, we can roll a WCF service very, very quickly using our API to expose just the data you need for the particular integration that you're trying to do. Another aspect of our integration capability, as I mentioned before, are our search providers. This is something that we've updated to make easier in recent months. So out of the box, we're using Scene.net. It's a great solution, especially for on-premise situations, but we've run into situations where we do need some things that are going to be more scalable and work better in the cloud. And to that end, we've added Azure Search Services as an out-of-the-box thing that we can use if we're hosting in Azure. We've added Elasticsearch. We have examples of how to add Amazon Web Search. And also things like Apache Solr are available for integration. It's a very well-defined process for integrating any search provider and building out the indexes for those. The last thing before we actually get into some demonstration and looking at things in Visual Studio and within Sitefinity is just displaying data. So the UI is very much separate from the data layer, so we are fully, as developers, in control of the styling, the client side, and the server side. We can run any kind of JavaScript we want, we can run the .NET code we want, and we can run CSS that's really going to be compatible with Sitefinity from almost any system. All right, so that's the end of the PowerPoint, and let's actually get into Sitefinity, and I'll run through a few of the things that we were talking about there. Before I start, are there any questions about things that we saw in the PowerPoint, or any things that you want to make sure that we get into? Yeah.
The Elasticsearch integration, if I have an external Elasticsearch server, can I like point Sitefinity
that and like consume?
Yeah, so in terms of consuming, I believe there are additional steps to that setup. Just because we can definitely point it, of course, to the Elasticsearch server and it'll do its own thing. We do have some things about how you can bring other content into the Sitefinity indexes so that we can have sort of full search indexes that maybe index both Sitefinity content and things that are outside of Sitefinity. And that's something that I won't be getting into today, but there is some information about that in our documentation, and if you reach out to us, we can definitely talk about it more. All right. So what we're looking at here is again that quantum project that we were just looking at before during the initial demonstration. And what I'm going to be taking you through is a lot of the basics of customization of the Sitefinity system. This has to do with building out custom templates, using Module Builder to build out our data model, how we can work with custom widgets and allow them to be imported into the system, be drag droppable, and also walking through some of the connectors so I can show you sort of the bits and bobs that you have to set up when you do fill out those connectors. So the first thing that we're actually going to be looking at are going to be page templates. So right now within Sitefinity, page templates are just ASP.NET master pages, and they also can be CSS/HTML files if we're working in an MVC style. So a lot of these things, for example, our Quantum 2.0 is actually connected to a master page that lives within our Visual Studio solution. And what we're going to do right now is actually open up that Visual Studio solution. That is the one. And take a look at it. So this is the basics within Visual Studio. I have our Sitefinity Thunder plugin, which has a lot of our boilerplate code and a lot of functionality with respect to being able to connect up to our sites in order to push and pull code. And what's actually running when Sitefinity runs on a server is very basically just something that runs completely within the app pool. It's just a web app. So all of this stuff that's within here is pretty standard ASP.NET stuff. So stuff that you've probably run into before, like our global.asax, our app data client, and things like that. And what we're actually going to be doing at this point is we're going to be building out a new template. So under our app data inside of Sitefinity, inside our website templates, I'm going to actually click add a new item. And since I have Sitefinity Thunder installed, I actually have a Sitefinity section in my Visual C# area of my add a new item. And because of where I am within the system, I only have a couple of templates exposed to me because I'm adding something somewhere that is probably an area where we want to add a template or a theme. I'm going to add that in right now. So we'll call our new template, and we'll add it into the system. And what it's going to do for me is it's going to build out the entire folder structure that we need. So we have our app master area where we have our master file, and it's actually built out the theme for us. These themes are really just collections of CSS files with that XML load order so we can get them to load as we want. Now, if we take a look at what's actually inside the master file that we built out, a lot of the Sitefinity Thunder templates are very simple. They are sort of the hello world implementation of whatever it is we're trying to do. So we can have it there, we'll know it will work, and then we can continue to build on it in order to get it to meet the standards that we need to meet for our clients. So what we have in here is very simple. We just have a form area and then some ASP.NET content placeholders, which are going to be those areas in which we can drag and drop content. We could continue to build this out. We could add in JavaScript. We could add in whatever we need to put directly into the template to make sure that it ends up on our pages. But at this point, we can actually just use Sitefinity Thunder to upload these templates. So there's our new template. I can upload it into the system. When we go back into our Quantum project and refresh, we'll actually be able to see it. So there's our new template. If we click into it, we should see those 3 ASP.NET content placeholders so that we can start dragging and dropping content into them. On the MVC side of things, and we'll be looking into this a little bit more with the CSS/HTML files, we've added some special things to act a lot like these content placeholders that are going to allow us to edit our templates in much the same way. And we can just put those in using Razor syntax in there. So there we have our header placeholder, our content placeholder, and our footer placeholder. These are named according to their IT master file. The only difference here between this and page creation is that we associate with a theme, which are those CSS files. So we have 4 themes within the system. The Quantum New is the one that we're using throughout most of this system in order to do all of our styling. But because you have full control over that CSS, you really can do a lot with making sure that your sites are going to be unique and are going to wow your marketers in the way in which they need to. So that's the basics of templates. I'm actually going to back out at this point and go more into the data model. So under administration, we have our module builder. Module builder is basically the easiest way in which we can build out new content types to store our data. And it's also going to take care of a lot of the work for us when it comes to being able to access that data via API and also building out RESTful web services for us. I have 3 that are currently within the system: careers, stores, and parallax items. If we're looking at careers, we can see an example of a slightly more complicated one than the one we're going to build today. But this actually is a module which contains 2 content types. It contains offices and job openings, and these are in hierarchy. So we can basically think of Quantum having offices throughout the United States, and in each of those offices they're going to have different job openings. And because we can organize this in such a way, we can also do things with permissions in order to limit permissions as to if somebody can't view a certain office, they of course can't view the job openings at that particular office. And all of the permission structure is of course built up around this. The other thing that we have here is our code reference for careers. So we're actually building out the some templates in both C# and Visual Basic in order to show you how to do things within your code, like how to add a job opening in code, how to query your job openings by ID, how to do that for offices as well. So we have all this templating built out for you, so you can start with something in order to help you with building out any custom widgets or any custom integrations that you might want to have, where you're pushing and pulling information in and out of the system. The other thing that it creates for you when we build something out with module builders, it creates the RESTful web services. And one of the best ways to figure out what RESTful web services it's building out is if I'm in Google Chrome right now, and if I pull up my network thing to see what sorts of requests are being made, and I go to say my career section of the content area, I'm going to be able to see a request that's going to be getting the JSON that's going to be used to populate this list. So I can actually see the exact JSON that we're using in order to populate this entire thing. So let's see if I can find it. There's our XHR. So we can see the exact request along with all of the parameters that we're using within the system. All of these things support sort expressions. They support skip and take expressions. So these can be filtered down so you're only getting at the content you want in order to populate your sites when you need it. So going back into Module Builder, we're going to build out a very quick module that's going to be a locations module. When we build these out, the first thing that we do is we give them a name. So the name of the module is going to be locations. And then after we build the module, the first thing that it's going to ask us for is a new content type. And this is something we've been putting a lot of time and effort into over the last few iterations of Sitefinity. And we've really built it out so that we can really relate content together a lot better and that we can really access it in ways which are going to make a lot of sense. So we give it a name for our content type. If we were adding a new content type to an already existing module, we could decide on a parent. So in the same way that careers had offices and job openings, we could do that. But since this is the first one, we don't have anything to put as its parent. Then we're able to figure out which fields we want to use to store data. So out of the box, we have things like short text, long text, choices, booleans like yes, no, dates and times, numbers, classifications, so any sort of thing, tags or categories that we've built out, any of our taxonomies that we want to add, addresses, related media, so images, videos, and files within the system, related data, so if we wanted to say relate locations to news articles, or we wanted to relate them to blog posts, we could do that within here. We can relate them to pages, basically any other piece of content within the system that we want to make relations to, we can with the module builder. For the purposes of this demonstration, I'm going to keep it pretty simple. We are going to have an address associated with our location. And once we choose the field, it's going to ask us a few questions about how we want people to input this field. So in this case, just an address form, a map, both an address form and a map, and whether or not the field images, a picture. And it has some different options for us. So still things like, is it a required field? But also things like limitations. So when we think about a content type, when we think about one of these locations, is it going to be just one image, or could it be multiple images that we can associate with the location? Is there going to be a max file size? What kinds of file types are we going to allow? Just as some of the basic things that we can get into. We could continue building this out, adding fields in order to really capture the sorts of data we need to collect about this content type. But in the purposes of keeping this short, we're going to finish, and then we're going to activate the module. At the point when we activate the module, we're actually using our ORM to build out the tables within the system that are going to store this data. This includes things like our permissions table and the things that we're going to use in order to control all the things about the data beyond just storing it within a table. It's also building out the code references at this point. So it can take a few minutes to actually get this spun up. At this point, the module is active. We have our code references. We could change it by adding additional content types or additional fields to our content type. We can tweak the name and description. We can tweak the order in which the fields are in the back end. If we actually went into our advanced settings, we can tweak the widgets we're using for data input, things of that nature. And if we want to use it on any one of our sites, all we have to do is turn on the specific module for the specific site. We do this so that we can keep things clean within a multi-site mode. And separate data in that way. So if I go to my quantum site, I configure my modules. We have our locations module right here for us. Once we save in the back end, we're going to be able to allow our content authors to enter in this locations data. The other thing that it builds out for us at this time is it builds out a very simple listing widget, much like our news widget. And because if you'll remember, with our widgets, we do have full control over the templates that are being used. We can then use that widget to basically style things how we would like, or we could build an entirely new widget accessing data via the API in order to push data out that way on the front end. So when we create a location here, it's going to basically just have those fields that we inputted with some nice widgets in order to input that data. So the title field is one of the ones that we had. We had our address. Unfortunately, I'm having some internet connection, so it's not pulling in our Google Maps connector. This is all just local. But we can put in our address, and we can select our images from our media libraries if we wanted to add an image to any of our locations. All right. So one of the things I've been talking about a lot are widgets and the customizability of those. So I do want to spend some time actually running through how we build those out, what those look like within Visual Studio, and some of the options we have there as developers. So within Visual Studio, I have a couple of widgets that I've actually already built out in this project. I have under my controls, I have a store locator widget. I have a grid widget, which actually uses our Kendo UI in order to pull data from an external database via web service and display it within Sitefinity. So we can use these to grab data that we may not want to manage within Sitefinity, but we do need to expose to our end users. And then I actually have another widget that I built out in more of an MVC style. That's a slider widget that's using data from within the system in order to put a nice parallax slider that you might drop on your front page. So we do support both those styles of development for our widgets. The first one we're going to be looking at is actually our grid widget. So this one is fairly simple. Whoops. Let's see if I can get it back up. So what's actually going on inside of here is fairly simple. All we're actually doing is we're calling out to some of the CSS that we include with Sitefinity in order to style our Kendo widgets, which are just a front-end framework. We have a div that we're going to be hooking into with some JavaScript. We have a little bit of additional styling. Then we actually have our JavaScript that's placing our Kendo grid. So basically all we're doing here is calling out to OData, calling out to a service which has this external Northwind database, to call in the customers from there, dealing with our page size, dealing with some settings that we're going to be setting on our Kendo grid in terms of whether things are groupable, sortable, which columns we're going to be surfacing to our users to be a user control, so we don't actually have control over our designer too much. So we can't offer a lot of options to our end users in terms of filtering data or doing things like that. But when we build things out either as an MVC widget using Feather, or as a server control, we have full control over our designers. So when they edit in, we can offer them options to maybe filter down the types of data they're accessing, or offer them different templates or different ways in which they're going to present data, so that we can make sure that these widgets are going to be very, very reusable. When we build out a widget, Sitefinity Thunder can help with some of them, like our user and server controls. So this register toolbox widget allows us, once we finish with our code, we can actually register a widget with Sitefinity. So that'll put it into the toolbox. It basically searches my whole solution for things that look like user and server controls. We don't have this happen with our MVC controls, because those are actually auto-registering based on some of the properties that are within the code. But when it finds things that look like user and server controls that can be registered with Sitefinity, like our grid control and our store locator, we're able to choose them. We're able to tell them how it's going to be displayed within Sitefinity, its title, its description, its developer name, which content toolbox we want it to go into. So we could put if it applied to social widgets, we could put it in our social widgets toolbox, those sorts of things. And once we decide which toolbox we go into, we're able to just upload it. Now this is actually already uploaded into the system, and what it looks like if we go out to our pages section and go into, say, our home page, is it's just a drag droppable widget like any other. So here we have our home page with our content block. I'm actually going to add another layout column here. And our grid widget was actually loaded into our content area. And we have this widget that's really pulling in all this information from an external database and using our Kendo tools in order to surface it. We use a lot of our Kendo and ASP.NET for Ajax tools in order to build out various parts of the system and offer you a lot of UI elements that are going to be reusable and display a lot of information to your users nicely. So. Another example is, I did mention that MVC widget that I built out with the slider that's using data from within the system, just using our API to call it. And this was just something that we found online as an example of a slider that uses parallax sliding. And this was able to be adapted into MVC very quickly over the course of about a day. And this has some custom styling on it, using some CSS that's separate a little bit from our theme. And we're able to just flow through these things where all the user's really telling us is they're giving us a title, they're giving us a little bit of secondary text, they're giving us an image, and down here they're telling us a page within the system to link to. So we can structure all of this data very beautifully within the system so that they don't necessarily have to tell us too much, but we are in control of the styling. So at this point, what I was going to do is I was going to take a quick break for questions, and then if we have some time, start delving a little bit more into our connectors for the various systems that we integrate with automatically. So does anyone have any questions about any of the things that they've seen thus far with the demonstrations and the PowerPoint?
Quick question, the table that you pulled in?
Coming over from the SharePoint development side of things. And when we connect to SharePoint, all we have to do is add the SharePoint site with the URL and login information so we can access the content within it. And so I can pull up that login information. I'm going to quickly just get it in from my PC, and then I'll display it out to you as well. And the SharePoint instance we're actually going to be connecting to in this instance, and hopefully the hotel Wi-Fi is going to be okay with my VPN connection, so I can connect to it, is going to just be a SharePoint 2010 site that we have internally. Alright, so we can see some of the information that we have to fill out, just a site name, URL, username, password, tell it whether it's a SharePoint server or SharePoint Online. And then after we are able to connect to our SharePoint server, we're just going to be telling it which lists, events, document libraries we want to be pulling in from that server. And just to give you an idea of the site that we're actually looking at, it's just this particular SharePoint 2010 site with a lot of libraries and lists, including things like announcements and all of that, and some document libraries. So I think I may be having a little bit of trouble with the VPN, but maybe not. Alright, so we've established a connection. Now we can either connect automatically or manually. Manually just gives us a little bit more control as to how these things are set up. So I'll go into manually just so I can show you a little bit more of the full-blown functionality. So we give our synchronization a name. We tell it which SharePoint list we want to pull in. This is going to pull up a list of all our SharePoint lists, including document libraries and events. And we're able to select which ones we want to sync to which content types and libraries within Sitefinity. So you can see that some of these are marked with what they are, so libraries, calendars, we look a little further down, we have a picture library. I'm going to stick with just the announcements list, and we should select the content type we want to sync it to in this case, and we can actually get Sitefinity create a new content type for us, and we can choose it if we want it to go into one of the already created modules. In this case, we're actually going to create an entirely new module with this new content type. And then we just have to choose our synchronization. This is going to be two-way from SharePoint to our server. So SharePoint, how often we want to sync. So we can set it up as not scheduled and just do it manually, or have it happen every 5 minutes or every day. The provider we want things to go to, so our data provider. And we can actually get into our advanced mapping settings if we were mapping to an already created content type. And we could say which fields from SharePoint are going to be mapped to which fields within Sitefinity. Now, since we're automatically creating a new field for all of these things, we don't really have the ability to do that with this particular content type because it's creating it new, but we could do that right in here. At this point, we can save. We'll have our list. We can sync it. It'll grab all of our data from that list. And also, at this point, this is one of the things that, again, will take a couple of minutes because it's building out that new module. It's using that ORM to build the database tables, build the permissions tables, everything within Sitefinity as well. Alright, so there we have our new announcements list, syncing SharePoint announcements to our new content type announcements. It's not scheduled, but we can decide to synchronize it right now, grab that content from SharePoint, and service it within Sitefinity. Now, the other thing about this is that, again, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, we can connect to multiple SharePoint sites, pull in multiple lists from those SharePoint sites into the same instance of Sitefinity, and schedule these lists to sync at different dates and at different times, depending upon how crucial it is that we keep them up to date. So now that it's synchronized, I'll go back to manage my sites, and in our Quantum site, I will configure the modules again, and we can turn on our announcements module. And it currently has a Quantum Announcements data provider, but if you'll remember, we synced to our default data provider with our announcements module. So I have to turn that on as well so we can see the results of our synchronization. And if we go into our content types, there's our announcements, and we'll first see the Quantum announcements, which are just for the site. They aren't being synced up with SharePoint, but we could store things separately there. Or we can go into our default area, which is being synced up with SharePoint. It's brought in all of this content from that SharePoint list. Alright, so before I move on to some of our other connectors, does anyone have any questions about SharePoint?
Has anyone used the SharePoint Connector before?
Alright, just moving down the list to Marketo. Ultimately, Marketo is one of our simpler connectors in terms of just the fact that it allows us to put Marketo tracking on each page, to raise events within Marketo when external forms are submitted, including things like lead scoring changes, and also basing personalization on Marketo criteria. There isn't too much to actually see in this connector area, just the fact that it is either connected or disconnected. We can connect it up. And if we look at some of the areas in which we start to see some of the Marketo functionality surfaced, we go into our forms area. When we create a new form, we have the idea of a couple of advanced options in there to change the Marketo lead score, to sync form fields from this form with Marketo lead fields, or to raise an event within Marketo when this form is submitted. So we can use this to trigger workflows and things like that within Marketo. The other thing is, of course, within our personalization area, just the idea that we can base user segments on characteristics coming in from Marketo, including lead score and Marketo lead fields. So because we're allowing you to type this in directly, these can be, of course, custom Marketo fields, so it doesn't have to be stuff that's out of the box. And we can do things like contains as opposed to strict matching. So that's ultimately the Marketo connector. It's set up, you're basically just putting in your Marketo credentials so that we can connect via the web services to Marketo. Our connector for Salesforce works in some ways a lot like our SharePoint connector in terms of we're basically just mapping out fields from our forms into SharePoint or into Salesforce, or from Salesforce into our user groups. So we currently have one that's enabled to our Salesforce connection, and we have two synchronizations that are enabled. One is a push, the other is a pull. And we can take a look at what's actually inside of those very quickly. So we have our contact us form within Sitefinity is syncing to our Salesforce leads, and we have contacts that are in the department SF, so that have the department field within Salesforce marked as SF, being pulled into our users as a specific role. So when we look at our leads, synchronization, all that's set up is just the fact that we choose a form from within Sitefinity. So we currently have two forms in this instance, contact us and our job application. We choose where we want it to go in Salesforce, so contacts or leads. And at a certain point, we're also able to filter our contacts by field. So if somebody fills out a field that we don't want to sync up, or we only want to sync it up on in certain instances, we can use that to filter in our contacts. And then we're able to actually just set up our mappings. And apparently I can't see my Salesforce server right now, but it works in much the same way that our SharePoint mappings do. In terms of we just are able to read all the fields from Salesforce and then map them to the Sitefinity form fields and schedule them to sync at certain dates. The last thing that I wanted to show you from our out-of-the-box connectors is our Digital Experience Cloud connector, just to show you all that's in here is just letting you know of the out-of-the-box activities that we're tracking with the Digital Experience Cloud in Sitefinity, things like our visited pages, forms, those things that we talked about earlier. When we deal with a connection, all that we need for a connection is the data center API key, give the connection a name, and we need a username and password to push in that data. This API key is just available in our administration section of the Digital Experience Cloud. Once this is pushed in, it'll automatically start tracking. So ultimately, that's all I have